welcome to an Apple a Day with Dr. Amanda. The next 2 weeks we'll be talking about leadership, especially in having hard conversations. If you're on YouTube, welcome, so you can listen and view in. Please like, share, and subscribe, and tell a friend. Today's topic, as I mentioned, is leadership, how to have hard conversations. And today's guest is Juan Arrojo, and he is from Panama, and he's been in the corporate world for 13 years. And then after leaving, found that his passion is in leadership development, coaching, and especially looking at mindsets. So Juan, it's so wonderful to have you here. So welcome.
Thank you for having me. This is going to be fun and interesting at the same time.
Yeah, I think so. So I'm going to be, we'll have our conversation about hard conversations, which can be challenging. Don't you agree? And so what are some hard topics that you've had to address as a leader?
Yeah, when I think of our conversations, my mind goes into two different lanes. There's the personal, hard, difficult conversation, but most of the experiences I've had have been in the workspace, and whether that's managing my team or just helping someone else. So I had the one of the most I think the most difficult conversations is the performance ones. Is the when someone's dropping the ball, when someone's not really uh, doing what they're expected to do, or at least what they committed to do. That's one of the most difficult ones. So I can remember two of them, and with one it was she interviewed well and she started doing all the right things, but then started morphing her story
Hmm.
to play the victim. So I had to jump in with my direct report. So at that point, my direct report was managing this person, and at some point, it's I have to talk to this individual,
Mhm.
and I actually got very forceful with it. I remember getting angry at some point because I said, you said this thing, but you're actually lying. Like this is a straight up lie. So that was one way. One of the conversations I can think of that was difficult, especially because I got very passionate. So well, this could go really bad if I get sent to HR, which she didn't. And I didn't really insult her, but I was definitely aggressive in my tone and my verbiage. I wasn't insulting her, but I was definitely this is it, like it's wrong. And then the other one I had was another. Was this one was he was completely unaware of his performance. So he thought he was doing great. He thought he was doing amazing. And then when we confronted him about it, it was always an excuse. He always had an answer for anything. It's like, where are we going to go with this? And I think those were two that come up. I don't know if you want me to go into the specific details about it, or you just want me to introduce the two conversations or one of them.
Well, I mean, I like what you said where you had to address, commitment with, or maybe employees not understanding where they're really at, right? And so you had to confront some situations. I think what I would like to clarify is what did that look like? So if you are going into that, say for the woman, for example,
Yeah.
perhaps with performance, what kind of language do you use, or maybe you found to use that keeps this conversation open? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. For both of them, actually, I did similar process. It was probably different wording, but it was the same, very similar process.
Mhm.
And I learned this before I learned this. The way I used to have them, I would just go straight to you're blowing it, or you're doing this wrong. I'm getting angry, or something like that. It was just very specific to my story. Um, and then after going through crucial conversations, which is kind of like a course to talk about it. I discovered that the simplest way to address this is not the easiest, but it's the simplest way, is to always mention the facts. So it was with the lady. It was, this is what my manager, my staff members telling me.
Mhm.
This is what she said. You said this is what I hear, and this is the story that I'm getting from it.
Mhm.
I would also you bring out examples of the prior conversation I had with this specific person. I would say, you said to me X months ago this and this.
Mhm.
None of that has happened. So like, what's happening? So at some point, I gave her a chance to explain it. But then as you keep the next phase of that was probing. Okay, so what do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? Because I hear that my team members doing this, and then you keep saying this other thing. You promised this thing, it wasn't delivered. So like it always went that route. And I think what it does, one of the things that helps, at least for me, is to separate the person from the behavior, and then also separate myself from the emotional, whatever the emotions are.
Mhm.
So I say, here are the facts, here's how I feel about it, here's what I was expecting, tell me your story, and what are we going to do about this going forward. And I think for me, in those specific instances, it allowed me to be forceful without being disrespectful.
Mhm.
Forceful in the sense of holding them accountable. Like, I'm putting you on this spot, and I have all the grounds to do that, even though I could be wrong. But like, I'm still saying, here are the things that are happening. There's no subjectivity to it. You can take it however you want, but like, here are the things that happened. Here's what I saw. Here's what was said. Here's what was done, and that makes it so much easier to stay the course of looking for a result.
Good. Yeah, so again, you asked a lot of questions, and then also like we're able to then hear her side, right? It sounds like so she could also speak. Now, did you find like over time, and I know you said you changed since you've had different courses, did you find that she diffused any anger, any type of possible conflict where like she shut down? And I don't know if that's in that case, where she was able
Yeah,
to not be defensive. I'm just curious.
I think in the beginning of the conversation, because this were several conversations, and the one I'm thinking of was almost the last one, the drop that spill the glass type thing. Um, in the beginning, she was getting defensive, but as I brought the facts, as I brought the things that were said and the things that were not done, she had no way out. The other thing that I think it's a good technique to, when it comes to performance, is to allow the individual to set the milestones. So I would say, here's what needs to be accomplished. How would you like to do it? And then there's a negotiation in the beginning as to how often should we meet, or what do I need to see? Am I okay with it? Am I not okay with it? But at the end, the individual is the one setting up those type of metrics. And I think with this individual, we had those. She set some of those metrics, and these were situations where you said you were going to do this, this, and this.
Yeah.
Well, this and this did not happen. So
Mhm.
as I brought these things up, and she would, there's nowhere, like she couldn't go anywhere. Like it's just like, oh yeah, you're right. Like what am I gonna do about it? Like
Right.
there's nothing she can do about it.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's the way it went for both conversations actually, except that with the guy, he just he was just completely oblivious to it. Like he would just find some excuse, all like every time there's just, oh wait, that's because this person didn't do this, or because this is
Sure.
like I don't care if the person didn't do it. Like you committed to something. Like what did you do to fix it?
Mhm.
And that's the way it goes.
And what was powerful is I loved how you said um, you had her pick a goal, like goal setting, really looking at, so that's empowering, her, but then, again, like what you're doing is just going back to the very goal that, she had set. So it really actually helps in a conversation, where you're going back to the very goal that she had decided on and, you were there for. So, to me, that helps with that empowerment, where they have the option of having that goal, but then perhaps it wasn't met, but then they can hopefully reflect on it, as you're going through that conversation. So thank you. That was good. And then how about, I know you addressed a couple, but if you had to have a hard conversation with an issue in an organization, like has that ever happened where it's not just a person, but perhaps maybe it's a mindset or a value, right? Where someone says they have a value with an organization, but it doesn't really appear, and perhaps even the leadership team is not aware that that value is missing. Have you ever had to do something like that? Where
Yeah, I have those. I have several of those in the corporate space. I don't know, I'm trying to remember if any of those was actually successful,
Mm-hmm.
um, for many different reasons. One of the things with me is I'm very forward with, since I'm very thoughtful in what I'm going to say. I'm very confident when I say it. So a lot of the class in these conversations comes from the management team looking at me so confident, and their first assumption was to say, "Oh, he just thinks he knows everything."
Mm-hmm.
So first, like in all these conversations, I had to like first overcome that label,
Mm-hmm.
and if I overcame it, then I was able to have the conversation. For the most part, I was never able to. So one of the things that I had to do, especially when it came to some organizational structure changes, I had to I couldn't say it myself. I had to use my manager or some other people on the team. So I had to not convince them, but I had to like present my idea to them, and then see if they will buy into it, and they will present it to the next layer. And I at least that worked a couple of times, but to me, speed wise, it was like it's just too slow. Like if we if we can have an honest conversation about this,
Mm-hmm.
and there's always going to be these, you think you know it all,
Mm-hmm.
and you're too young so you don't know enough,
Mm-hmm.
whatever all these excuses that directors usually do have in those positions. It just makes everything too much red tape is what they would say in the corporate space, and it can be frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
So where I failed, I think, in that instance was to look at it the same way as I was looking from to the staff.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when I presented those issues, it was always like, here's my idea,
Mm-hmm.
and here's why this could be better, as opposed to turning it the other way and saying, you're saying this,
Mm-hmm.
here are the things that are happening. Um, I don't think this is producing the same result. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
I never got to that conversation. I never approached it that way. So that's kind of like a lesson to learn from that, especially when I could do it so well with staff members, but I couldn't do it for the higher level leadership.
Mm-hmm.
But that's probably because it was mostly my idea. So like I'm very passionate about it, and when you're very passionate about something, it gets tricky to think about it differently. So yeah, that definitely happened several times, especially because my thing is challenging the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
So this purpose of, I believe we should all be able, or not only able, but like we are meant to create a life that's in alignment with us,
Mm-hmm.
that requires us to be different. And so I approach my work ethic the same way. And then when I saw things that weren't working, I would just immediately like, this is not working, and
Yeah.
we need to change that. And that people don't like that at times
Mm-hmm.
because there's an authority conflict there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that can be hard too, especially but I like what you said where, you had like perhaps, some lessons learned, but a lot of it was, those, the right questions, right? Or the right frame that you kind of, had asked like, okay, well, what do you think? Or like, have you noticed this? And so I think those are good approaches. And you also mentioned a lot of times where you may have different people, right, with different mindsets are maybe too similar, right? Like maybe some of the, corporate, personalities,
Yeah.
sometimes there's clashes. And, again, it's like we're everybody, right? Or like, so I think that's also interesting too, where you have like maybe perhaps many passionate people, all in one room. And how do you leave space to hear everybody? Because that's how you grow. So I'm sure like
Yeah.
you kind of mentioned you had a lot of that.
I was working with, I mean, they're all actuaries. So for those who don't know what that is, you can Google it. Actuarial science. There are a lot of smart people. They're
Mhm.
all smart. and that gets tough because they all think they have the right answer.
Mm-hmm.
We all think like at some point we all think we have the right answer. So when you have all these smart people like fighting for the right answer, which is not really teamwork, but it just happens. It's a crucial conversation, but like the question is like who takes the lead to facilitate that conversation. And in the environment I was in, it was fast paced, so I don't have time to be herding cats because that's really what was happening. um, but it's just part of the game. And I think now that I know more about sales and more about marketing,
Mm-hmm.
now I can see like, oh, like if I would have taken sales principles and applied them to these conversations,
Mm-hmm.
it would have been so much different because it would have been about them or the company. I would have been able to say, okay, the company was this. Here's the ultimate outcome. Are we only in agreement with that? Yes or no? Okay, cool. This is what's happening. This is the outcome that's not happening.
Mm-hmm.
I'm proposing this. Who's on board for that? What are the objections? Can we talk about them? That would have been a much different approach. But by then, that was years ago. I didn't know anything about sales. I was just
Sure.
trying to do the best I could.
Yeah. Well, that's good. But, I like that you're thinking, okay, well, now what I've learned, right? And even if you're in the audience, perhaps you're either in the corporate world or you're perhaps, shifting or you're in leadership development, right? And, like Juan, you're just mentioning how you had some shifts in, your thinking, and even things that you learn now. So perhaps, and you are perhaps even like frustrated with your current conversations. Hopefully you'll be getting some tips today, right? About how you can do that. Have you ever had hard conversations where it continues to be circular, right? Or like, I don't know if you've been,
Yeah,
it's like you're talking and then it keeps going in circles and circles and circles. How do
yeah,
you move out of that?
that's tough. That's a tough one. I have those conversations at work, and I have those conversations with coaching clients. Going in circles is interesting because I think, based on what I know now, I think the one thing that's important there is the person willing to kind of like let go of what they believe in the situation, so that they open themselves up to a different option. I don't. That's a big conversation in there. Um, but what has helped the most was the facts.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I remember with the individual that always had an excuse. That was a circular conversation. I don't remember. I was helping someone. I was kind of mentoring the manager of this person, and she already had with him, I don't know, at least 7 conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And it was always the same thing. It was always the same conversation. And when I became involved with it, I stuck to the facts,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's the ultimate, because it's almost like going on trial, because if you do it well and you have the facts, like you can't run away of the things that already happened. It's almost like having, this is the video of you, like you said you didn't steal something, here's the video, like who's that in the video. So when you have facts and you stay with them, it really becomes of, here's what happened, did this happen, yes or no? And the person can lie, or the person can accept that it did happen. Obviously, facts could also, like, depends who's doing what, but like, that's why there's documentation. But I think staying with the facts is what helped the most, because at some point in that conversation, I think it was like 30 minutes into it, the person finally accepted, hey, I dropped the ball. And then once they accept, yeah, these are the facts, you did not deliver, then you can turn it into, what are you going to do about it?
Mm-hmm.
And it's also possible, if the person never accepts it, I think it's up to whoever is having that difficult conversation to decide how much they're going to invest in it, because it's always a two-way
Mm-hmm.
street. It can't just be a one-way. So you have to be willing. I mean, sometimes managers have to be willing to say, okay, I mean, if you continue to do this, then I think there's no other option than to, as I think Southwest is the one that says this, we're just going to share you with our competitors.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Is that what you want? That's okay. Be free, be gone. But like, these are the facts. We can't run around the facts. Are you saying that we're all lying, or are you like, what are you saying if you're denying these facts? Because the facts are facts. You can't change them. They already happen. I think if you stay with that lane, it usually at some point the person has to concede. Now, if they choose not to, that's when you have to choose and say, okay, then I think we're just gonna have to make a change
Mhm.
and move on.
Mhm. So,
Circular, yeah, and it's tough. It's tough
yeah,
because a lot of times circular conversations, it's just the person doesn't want to accept
yeah,
their mistake.
right. Or
They
owning
just
or having
continue to
ownership.
find an excuse to justify whatever it is that they're doing.
Mhm. Sure. Yeah, and that can be hard. And I know you mentioned a lot of times using facts, right? And then wanting to still remediate or perhaps, work with the person, and then at some point, if that continues, right, or there's just not that ownership or that integrity, perhaps, different decisions being made. But, that
Yeah,
big type of sticking with those facts. So just on that topic, what are other really helpful tips for, perhaps the people in the audience or anybody that is dealing with hard conversations? What are some more?
yeah. I always think if it's performance to me, if it's a performance thing, 'cause it's always the simplest route to fix that is to let the person set up the milestones, the expectations. The manager decides, here's what needs to happen. Are we in agreement with what needs to happen? Okay, how are you gonna do it? What do you propose? How are you gonna get that done? If you get the individual to own the pieces of creating the outcomes, when the conversation comes, they have to own up to it.
Yeah.
It wasn't me. It wasn't me thing. It was you decided this is what you needed to get done. You didn't get it done. Okay, what are you gonna do differently? Because it's all your responsibilities on you. So performance wise, um, that's easy.
Mhm.
Um, to me, the facts. What makes the cool thing about the facts is the story. So one of the things that I had to learn whenever having any type of conversation, even now on social media, when you read a post and you just get angry, like you just get angry, just for whatever reason, you're angry. What I realized is that the story I create from what I read, hear, or see
Mhm.
is much more important. It's what drives usually drive makes it difficult. So it's like it's difficult conversation probably because I think the conversation is difficult, not because the conversation itself is difficult. I just like the story I created is so dramatic that
Mhm.
I consider it difficult. So the idea of stating the facts and then saying, okay, out of these facts, I'm creating this story,
Mhm.
that opens up the conversation to be more neutral because you're not accusing the individual or you insulted me or you're discriminating against me or whatever the conversation might be about. It's more like, here are the things that are happening,
Mhm.
here's the story I created. So if someone's humble enough to do that, here and that means that they're willing to admit that the story I created is wrong,
Mhm.
could be wrong, and I'm giving the other person the chance to say, okay, here are the facts, what is the story that you have created,
Mhm.
what is the story that you are trying to create, what is your intent, what is your purpose. Once
Mhm.
both stories are known, then you can come up with like the mix, the one that's probably a better option. And I don't think a lot of people, when they have conversations, separate those. They usually start like, you insulted me or you did this to me. It's always like, you did this to me, you did
Mhm.
something to me. It's like, no, not really. Like, unless they're physically like punching you or you don't really know. You just saw something and then you decided, oh, that action means um, they wanted to put down my authority. Like it's kind of like I remember in one conversation I was having, it's like, if you see me walking into work and the very first thing you see me is just throwing a beer can into the trash, like, what is it that you're gonna think about me? It's 9 a.m. in the morning. Why is this person dumping a beer can on the trash can? And And it was interesting to see reaction because that's what we usually do when it comes to conversations. It's like you see something and you immediately go, "Oh, that person's doing this, and this." It's like you have no idea.
Yeah.
So the story, the separating the story from the facts is very helpful.
Mm-hmm. And that's true. And I like how you said, making sure you're hearing each other, but also that humility piece, right? Like if both people can come to the table and be able to hear each other, right? And then being able to hear each story, and then also looking at the facts will help. But again, that takes two willing people, to be able to do that. And I know you also mentioned before, with social media or whatever it is, so sometimes there is anger. So say, for example, you're upset. Like, what are some tips that you have in when like you're upset, saying like the other person's really angry, right? And sometimes I always like to go to my psychology where I'm saying if both people are really upset, right? And sometimes we have escalation or there's times like our cortisol in our body. I always tell teachers, I do a lot of consulting with teachers and educators, administrators, that it takes 70 minutes for us to have our cortisol calm and go back and normally, so if anything, students or people or anything, especially with trauma or anything in the background. So what are some things that you've ever had to do if you're super angry and you know that the conversation may have to take place at another time? Like, did that ever happen, and what did you do?
Yeah, I mean, I've had it. I have the bad decisions and the good decisions. In the bad decisions, there's a point where I just walk out. It's like I just need to go, and I just walk out. Which is like for most people in the U.S., that's rude.
Mm-hmm.
You just committed a sacrilege, and you should be fired just for walking out. It's like, well, in my mind, it's like I'd rather walk out. At least for me, worked for me, but not necessarily for the room.
Mm-hmm.
Was to say out loud, I'm really getting frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not really you, it's just the conversation as a whole or the situation. Like, I'm really getting frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as I say that out loud,
Mm-hmm.
and then it actually calms me down.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I do think it serves some, if for the person that's willing to engage in there, I do think the individuals calm down
Mm-hmm.
because they realize, oh, he's aware that he's angry. It's
Mm-hmm.
not like they don't have to tell me. So that
Sure.
they somehow realize, oh, he knows that he's out of line or that he's angry. I don't have to tell him anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And the entire energy of the room changes a bit. It's still it's still tense, but it's a lot different when I have said, I'm getting frustrated, I'm getting angry. It's not you, it's me. I'm probably not saying anything right. I'd rather just shut up and say nothing. Um, that has helped me. The other thing that I think have helped has helped in the past was to go back to the problem
Mm-hmm.
and to the especially the outcomes. If it's a conversation of problem solving and there are three different ideas of people trying to fight for each other, what has helped in those instances for me has been, okay, what is it that we want? Like, what is it that we all can agree on
Mm-hmm.
that we want?
Yeah.
Okay. And then I think once that happens, once you go back to the focus of that problem solving session, then it becomes a little easier
Mm-hmm.
to to be objective because it's like, okay, so we got three proposals in the table, here's what we want. Okay, which one gets us closer, or which one seems to be the simplest to whatever implement, something like that. And that has helped too. So I have my own style. I rather just say it out loud because it
Yeah.
just helps me, and it's really selfish, but at the same time it lets other people know I'm aware. Like, I'm aware I'm mad. Like, I'm totally aware I'm saying these wrong.
Sure.
Like, but this is what I want. Like, this is what I mean. This is what being able to say that aloud. I think it takes courage to do it,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it people learn to appreciate it as you do it more often.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good wisdom tips you talked about. Really first, if you are having to leave the room, but you mentioned about the feelings, and a lot of times, when we share with somebody else, I'm feeling this way. You can't, some people may try to argue with, but you can't argue with how we're feeling, right? How we're perceiving that we're feeling in that moment, and it is vulnerable, for you to be able to say, I'm feeling frustrated, right? And even saying I'm feeling frustrated, this conversation, we'll have to pick up another time and leave it, or whatever that is, or being able to say, what are we all here to agree on if, it's not to heat it, right? Maybe perhaps you being able to say that you've noticed, then everybody kind of calms down and you can get to that point of saying, what is our outcome, right? Or what are we agreeing on? So I think those are helpful, depending on the situation, the circumstance.
Yeah,
And
I think there's something. This is probably a different subject. It's just
mhm,
this talks a lot about culture because
yeah.
it to me I think it's interesting, especially when it's problem solving conversations, which is those are the most often ones. Like you're in a meeting, you're trying to solve something, and two people just start fighting each other, and that happened a lot in my area. I think an environment that can't have conflict,
Mhm,
like having honest to goodness conflict,
mhm,
but that no egos are getting in the way. It's an ideal environment because that's where the best solutions come out of that.
mhm,
But creating that environment, that culture to be able to value arguments,
mhm.
it's a that's a different challenge altogether.
Yeah.
And for the most part, at least in the environments I've seen and experienced, most of the environments are a collection of individuals, not a team. So
Mhm,
like each individual is fighting for their own ego,
mhm,
and it was I always I felt like it was like, well, somebody has to give up, and it was usually I would usually choose to like, okay, I'm willing to be wrong, or I'm not, I'm just not going to engage in this, like I'm done with this, and I move on to something. And
mhm.
but like you lose a lot
Yeah.
if you can't have that argument, that passionate discourse on something. The solutions are always the same ones because everyone's like thinking this. It's just gonna. I don't want to argue, so
Mhm.
I'm just gonna agree with whoever says the best thing, and it happens. And it's tough. It
Yeah.
takes some
Yeah.
leadership to say, oh no, we're gonna argue about this.
Yeah.
Like we need to argue. It's tough. It's tough to create that environment.
Yeah. No, that's good points. It can be hard, to come to that or even, perhaps even having that, I think, sometimes it's that safety, right? Or like building that trust where you can come together to do that, right? Because sometimes it's that surface level, getting to know each other. And then once you have in any relationship, right, some type of conflict or disagreement, right? Perhaps maybe it's not some disagreement, but you both have different perspectives. But what it is you're willing to hear each other, right? You're willing to hear each other and have those conversations that aren't always, they're not always comfortable. And I think that's hard, right? Like you mentioned, sometimes it's really hard to do that and really, dig that deep in for each person to reflect, be able to come back and say, like, am I hearing the other person or do I want to say what I have to say, right? And that can be challenging, especially in the moment. Yeah. And so thinking about, any books or resources that you have, listened to, what would you recommend for the audience or anybody who wants to do or grow in the area of having hard conversations?
Yeah, I think the book that I mentioned, I think I mentioned it a few
Good.
minutes ago.
Mm-hmm.
Crucial Conversations. It's by Kerry, Patterson, Joseph Grenny, Ron Macmillan, and Al Switzler. It's by Vital Smarts is the publisher, I think. But yeah, you can find it. This is the one that talks about. They use a cool acronym. I don't remember all the letters, but it's like state. I mean, it's all about stating whatever the circumstances are. But the keywords that I remember from it was the tell the story,
Mm-hmm.
share the facts, tell your story, and then ask for their perspective. So it's share share the story or share the facts, tell my story, and then ask for perspective. I mean, if you follow that sequence, it maintains the conversation more in the objective state, even if there are emotions involved,
Yeah, that's really powerful.
um, because it does separate the individual. Most of the times when crucial conversations go wrong, it's because the conversation evolves in the personification of, of the behavior. So the other party thinks you're attacking them, and that changes if you state these are the facts, and if you focus on the facts, then that ego can be taken out of the picture, and then the conversation can move forward.
Well, thank you. So I will be posting the Crucial Conversations book, and the authors on the podcast description as well as YouTube. So make sure if you are in the world, and it is important what you just said about applying, right, what we're reading, applying the principles. So that's the whole point, right? When we have wisdom or any type of practical tips that will help us grow, we want to, apply them, even if it's one thing a day. Juan, and I really appreciated all of the wisdom that you provided, talking about hard conversations and even, thinking of development and lessons learned. But what is one ending wisdom tip that you would want to give to the audience so that they
Yeah.
can take it and apply it today?
Uh, I don't know if this is an application,
Okay.
but it's definitely a thought that I think one has to ponder a little bit. The idea that you have to be willing to speak in full confidence while still be open to the possibility that you're 100% wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when it comes to difficult conversations, um, all the facts could point to a specific story that you're telling yourself. But if you're willing to be humble enough to say, I'm very confident about this, and still be open to say, but I could be wrong, that is a very interesting energy to walk with into the conversation, because it does open the door to have that engagement with the other individual. And that's something that I had to practice. And if you read my post, you wouldn't notice, because when I post, like I'm posting, like I'm in full confidence, like it's just fully confident that what I'm saying is makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But internally, like I know I could be actually wrong. But very few people engage me that way. Most people assume I just think I know it all, and they just move on. And but yeah, if you are willing to think that you could be wrong, no matter all the facts, it actually makes it a lot of things much simpler, especially when having these type of conversations.
Great. So I like how you said, be confident, right, in what you bring, but also have humility enough to know that you might not have it
Yeah,
all have it all there. And I like that. So that's openness to conversation. So audience, today you can take that tip. Maybe it's application, maybe it's something to reflect on, right? How you do when you're conversing. And so, Juan, it's been really a pleasure to have you and talking about hard conversations. Audience, if you enjoyed this, like, share, and subscribe. Do a lot with leadership development and, working on coaching. Is there any type of website or anywhere else where the audience, if they're interested in some of the things you do, they could go to learn more about you?
yeah. I was thinking about that. I'm redoing everything I have out there online, so people can either find me. I think I'm mostly on Facebook.
Okay.
So one-on-one coaching.
Okay.
You'll find me on Facebook. That's also my Instagram.
Okay.
But I rather have conversations, so they can just send me an email
Okay.
at hello@juanonOnecoaching.com,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm the one replying to those.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Audience, I hope you have a great day and make sure you're back again for some more daily doses of wisdom. So take care and be well.